Gypsies, perhaps, one of the most strange and specific peoples of the world. They do not have their own state. A large part of them still leads a nomadic lifestyle to this day. They have distanced themselves from civilization so much that we can't even more or less accurately name their number. In this video, we will try to figure out where the Gypsies came from and where they are going, how they live, and why almost all the inhabitants of the planet do not like them. For a long time, scientists could not establish the origin of the Gypsies, until modern methods of analysis confirmed the theory put forward in the 18th century. Scientists can only speculate about the specific lands where the Gypsies first appeared. However, most researchers agree that the Gypsies are emigrants from India, who initially migrated to the Near East and then to Europe. The first major mention of Gypsies begins with the Byzantine Empire, where they successfully integrated into society and adopted Christianity. With the fall of the empire, the Gypsies changed their vector to the west and began to fall into Europe. European Gypsies often call themselves Roma. Here the logical chain also stretches to India. Since ancient times, all the population of India is divided into castes. Brahmins are priests and scholars. Kshatriyas are warriors. Vaishyas are traders and craftsmen. And the last caste are the Shudras, who are engaged in serving the other groups. Untouchables, people engaged in the dirtiest work, including leather processing, laundry, clay work, and garbage collection. They live in designated ghettos of Indian cities and on the outskirts of Indian villages. They cannot visit hospitals and stores, use public transport, and enter government institutions. According to this theory, it was precisely such injustice that prompted the future Gypsies to leave India in search of a better life. The problem is that even the Gypsies themselves have been wandering for so long that they have lost a reliable knowledge of where their homeland was. In Gypsy legends, the people are portrayed as eternal nomads who do not have their own land. The path to the west initially, the nomads were welcomed in the west with great hospitality. There was an opinion that Gypsies are exiled Christians from the Near East who were forced to flee due to the persecution of Muslims. Apparently, that's why in English and Spanish languages, Gypsies are associated with Egyptians. In the Russian language, Gypsies got their name from the life of Saint George of Athos, where they were called Athinganoi. This was a certain Byzantine sect of renegades from the Christian faith who practiced witchcraft. But let's get back to the West. At first, the nomads were even helped with food, shelter, and money. However, such a carefree life did not last long. By and large, the main reason for the spoiled relations with the Europeans became the lifestyle of the Gypsies. They constantly moved from place to place and did not intend to integrate into the local community. The nomadic way of life by the Middle Ages had already become illegal, as it was considered vagrancy, and the Gypsies did not intend to give up their traditions. The unwillingness to blend in with the surrounding world even led to an unofficial ban on a number of European professions. For Gypsies, fortune-telling and begging were characteristic, which in turn caused rejection among Europeans and gave rise to many myths about Gypsy witchcraft abilities. There was also a widespread myth about cannibalism. All this led to the fact that in the Middle Ages, harsh anti-Gypsy laws appeared in Western Europe, and they spread throughout Europe. For example, in England, the law imposed a death penalty for all Gypsy men simply on the basis of their nationality. Later, the law was tightened, and even Englishmen who had any contact with Gypsies were hanged. And in the Holy Roman Empire, it was declared that the murder of a Gypsy was not considered a crime, which led to pogroms and persecution of Gypsies throughout the empire. Louis issued orders for the deportation of Gypsies from France under threat of murder. In Sweden, all male Gypsies were expected to face the gallows. The Russian king Friedrich Wilhelm even ordered the killing of all Gypsies over 18 years old. In general, Western Europe dealt with the Gypsy people ruthlessly and mercilessly. So it happened that the Gypsies massively moved to Eastern Europe. And the remaining part of the nomads in the West became even more marginalized and got involved in crime. On the way to the east, in Eastern Europe, the Gypsies met with great loyalty. In the Russian Empire and Poland, they were not such a foreign population and could even relate themselves to different statuses and lead a full-fledged lifestyle. Gypsies came to Russia mostly because of the partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In Russia, nomads united into camps, which sometimes reached 25 tents. Having arrived at a new location, the women went to the nearest villages to tell fortunes and also to ask for food, while the men went to fairs to sell horses. Settled gypsies usually lived in St. Petersburg, Moscow, and other large cities. Many of them were artists, choir members, and earned quite well. Interestingly, in 1876, the soloist of the Tula gypsy choir Shishkina married the well-known aristocrat Tolstoy, one of the older brothers of the author of War and Peace. By Catherine's decree, gypsies were equated to Christians by default, but they could also fall into other statuses. Gypsies, as a rule, were engaged in small-scale manual production, played in theaters, and actively traded. In other countries of Eastern Europe, things went worse. Surprisingly, but in Romania, where now, according to estimates, there are possibly more gypsies than in any other country, they were in the status of slaves until 1856. In the Ottoman Empire, the situation was quite good. The gypsies had all the rights. They even often converted to Islam. Changing religions is a gypsy peculiarity. Usually, they adhere not to their own religion, but to the religion of the people on whose lands they live. But of course, all this with elements of their own culture and the addition of esotericism. New reality. Tastes gradually changed, and with them the position of the gypsies in the 18th–19th centuries in many European countries. Anti-gypsy laws began to be repealed. Despite the weakening, the core issue of integrating gypsies remains unresolved. While the Industrial Revolution was raging, and according to gypsy laws, they were forbidden to work in factories and plants. Moreover, gypsies began to be clearly associated with child theft among Europeans. Thus, the new century and the new industrial world again became a blow to the nomadic people, and they were again isolated from society and the economy. Of course, there were gypsies who assimilated with the locals and began to lead a European sedentary lifestyle, but this was the exception, not the rule. And after such assimilation, they were no longer considered gypsies and became full-fledged members of the society of any country, disappearing from general statistics. And the 20th century for the gypsies became not just difficult, but tragic. The Third Reich. Everything that pertains to racial laws and genocide in relation to Jews also applied to gypsies. In 1935, the gypsies were effectively stripped of all rights in the Reich territory. After the start of World War II, they began to be massively persecuted and exterminated. In the concentration camps, according to various estimates, up to 50% of all the gypsy population in Europe perished. Gypsies in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. According to the population census, in the year 1926, there were about 160,000 gypsies in the Soviet Union. However, experts believed that there were actually many more representatives of this people, simply not trusting the authorities. They often tried not to catch the eye of statistical workers, or to pass themselves off as a person of another nationality, a Greek, Romanian, Hungarian, or Moldovan. The nomadic lifestyle made the gypsies apolitical inhabitants of the country, so they were quite indifferent to the idea of universal equality. Moreover, the gypsy people saw nothing ostentatious in wealth. On the contrary, having a lot of gold and money was considered very attractive to them. Meanwhile, the majority of gypsies lived modest lives. Card readings, dances with songs in front of merchants and nobles, blacksmith work, and begging were almost the only sources of income that allowed them to feed their nomadic family. In the Russian Empire, the October Revolution deprived them of these incomes, completely changing and worsening the usual way of life of the gypsies. And although the communists did not consider them class enemies and did not subject them to persecution like the bourgeoisie, the nomads were negatively related to both the worker-peasant revolution and the cardinal changes that came to the country. After it, gypsies, like everyone else, did not avoid working in collective farms. From 1922 in the Soviet Union, 52 collective farms were created from representatives of the gypsy nationality. Families who wished to settle permanently were allocated land and monetary subsidies ranging from 500 to 1,000 rubles to create their own farmstead. At that time, many gypsies exploited financial assistance. However, Most of them never changed their nomadic lifestyle for a settled one. Only 5% of the nomads became collective farmers, and even those didn't commit too much to real work. There is a known case when in the Artel in the Lipetsk region, consisting of 50 gypsies, local residents were hired for collective farm work. The Roma themselves did not work in the fields, and the grown crop, instead of being handed over to the state, was divided equally among their own. By the spring of 1933, dozens of camps had moved to the big cities. It was another year of famine. Moscow attracted nomadic gypsies with the possibility of somehow feeding themselves. The capital was covered with a network of new campsites. Immediately after the introduction of the passport system, a large-scale special operation began to clean up the big cities from undesirable elements. In less than a full summer month, 5,470 gypsies were sent from Moscow to Siberia. In total, over the past years, at least 10,000 gypsies have become victims of deportation. During the Great Patriotic War, a part of the gypsies joined the ranks of the Red Army and also joined the partisan movement. 12 representatives of the gypsy people received the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. In the post-war years, Baron Vladimir Sharkazy became widely known. Under his leadership, a criminal clan grew, whose type of activity had a specific character. In addition to thefts and robberies, the gypsies blackmailed priests, having previously collected compromising evidence on them. And the Holy Fathers, fearing scandal, did not give the criminals to the police. The group operated widely, spreading its tentacles throughout the Soviet Union. Sometimes ordinary members of the gang were arrested, but they could not get to the next baron for a long time. Only after some time were they able to plant a bug in the gypsy's room, and only after that were they able to catch Sharkazy. Soon he and his closest aides were convicted and shot. In general, if the gypsy camp was involved in any illegal activities, it was very difficult for the police to deal with them. It was never possible to infiltrate their own police agent due to the complete dislike of strangers. And if you consider that even the mafia camps did not cooperate with each other, then the option of a planted Cossack also did not work. The only option was to marry a gypsy girl. But young gypsy girls got married at 14-15, which was absolutely unacceptable for a Soviet citizen. Not everyone knows that in the countries of the former Union, gypsies stopped wandering at the very beginning of the thaw. When Khrushchev issued a decree requiring all citizens to register permanently, the gypsies settled down. Despite the break of traditions, many gypsy families still remember the late Soviet period as a relatively well-fed and peaceful time, when they had jobs, often related to traditional crafts. Gypsies, blacksmiths, tinsmiths, wove baskets, and the skills were passed down from generation to generation. The Soviet Union, on the one hand, provided gypsies with full rights, and on the other, destroyed their traditional way of life. In the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, there was official study of the gypsy language, and even the publication of literature in their language. For example, the works of children's writers Bartow or Zhitkov. Possibly, this was one of the most successful examples of gypsy integration into society, but, on the other hand, without a traditional way of life, were these people still gypsies? The gypsy lifestyle, the gypsies' isolation from the outside world, forced them to create their own internal laws. There is even their own gypsy court, when the barons, the heads of families, gather and make their decision. The most severe punishment is expulsion from the camp. Such punishment is applied for large debts, marital infidelity, murder, or deception of their own. Moreover, they will only punish for an affair with a gypsy woman. If the infidelity was with a gajo, there will be no investigation at all. Gajo means not a gypsy, so the nomads divide people into two parts, gypsies and the rest of the people. This suggests a man will likely only face consequences for an affair with a gypsy woman, but not a non-gypsy, gajo woman. And an investigation is improbable. Gypsies have their own unique democracy. They pass judgment on criminals, going out on the road with the whole camp to carry out the punishment. If they have sentenced to disgrace and dishonor, one of the women hits the criminal several times in the face and body with her lower skirt. From this moment on, he no longer has the right to appear in the camp, and no one will lend him a hand, nor sit at the table with him. For gypsies, this punishment is as severe as death. since surviving outside the camp without their community's support is extremely challenging. An interesting observation with which any resident of a northern city would agree. Most representatives of the Gypsy nationality have excellent health. How many times have you seen children who run down the street in winter, practically barefoot, without experiencing the slightest discomfort? And women can sit for hours practically on concrete waiting for charity. Scientists assert that gypsies can resist not only frostbite, but also many dangerous diseases, such as leprosy, cholera, and tuberculosis, all because in their native India all these were commonplace. As a result of the hardcore selection, gypsies have a superior immunity. While the plague wiped out half of Europe, the losses among the gypsies were minimal. Well, about fortune-telling, of course, this tradition did not arise in a vacuum. In old times, gypsy fortune-tellers performed several functions at once. Firstly, they worked as psychologists. Sometimes they convinced a person to take a decisive step. Sometimes they prevented a mistake. Sometimes they just listened to stories about other people's troubles. Secondly, the gypsies acted as guardians of someone else's love. For example, they could subtly pass a note from a boy to a girl or express his feelings under the guise of fortune-telling. Some Russian guys even did this. They bribed a gypsy girl to predict a marriage with a specific young man to a certain girl. And then they watched the girl's reaction. If she was happy, they could go courting. If she was upset and didn't believe the fortune, well, it wasn't meant to be. The provision of esoteric services is still widespread among gypsies. It's a business, both card reading and palmistry. Knowledge of how to do this is passed down from generation to generation and is also an important part of the culture. A gypsy wedding is a unique event. It is customary to celebrate it with great fanfare, very pompously. Parents usually try to marry off their children as early as possible, so that the young ones do not have time to spoil, and the bride could easily adapt to life in her husband's family. What is carefully hidden from society is the age of the groom and the bride. Have you ever seen a 12-year-old girl in a wedding dress? Believe me, among the Roma people, this is a very common phenomenon. In 2023, a recording of a wedding between 17-year-old Ivan and 14-year-old Diana, which went viral, appeared on the internet. And how many such marriages take place without publicity? The condition and status of the family and society influences the choice. Everything is discussed in advance. When it's time to get married, the bride's parents bring a dowry for the bride. This is more of a formality, as all of this is passed on to the young people at the wedding. By the way, it's customary to give lavish and numerous gifts for the wedding. All the relatives gather for this celebration. The festivities go on not just for a day, but sometimes stretch into weeks. Well, after the wedding, it's time to talk about funerals. Among the gypsies, it is believed that a person needs the same things in the afterlife as they do in their regular life. If a person dies, it depends on their gender. Relatives or friends are given 3 items through the coffin: an icon, a blanket, and a carpet. Relatives and close ones follow the procession from the house behind the coffin. They throw a cloth on the ground. They put essential items and alcohol in the coffin. For a meeting with relatives, mirrors are covered in the house for 40 days. It's interesting that the gypsies even have a national flag, Romano Stiago. It was adopted in 1971 when the First World Gypsy Congress took place in London. The flag's description is linked to Indian culture. The field is divided into 2 parts. The colors symbolize the earth and the sky. In the center of the flag is a red Dharma chakra, the wheel of Dharma, which is also on the flag of India. The interpretation is as follows: the earth is the material world, the sky is the spiritual, and the wheel is the gypsy's life. Gypsy culture is not only rich, but also unique. It contains elements of the cultural heritage of the peoples of those countries where they manage to live. Take, for example, fairy tales. Among them are characters such as wizards and revived dead. These images can be found in the magical stories of Hindus, as well as well-known heroes of Russian folklore like house spirits and forest spirits. The culture of the gypsies, in turn, influenced the development of European music, both classical and modern. Once in Andalusia, an autonomous region of Spain, flamenco emerged, not without the help of dynamic gypsy folklore. an entire musical style. Today, this passionate song-dance tradition of the inhabitants of southern Spain is included in the list of masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage of humanity by United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. In another part of Europe, in the 18th century, the love of the famous composer Ferenc Liszt for gypsy folklore was reflected in the famous piano cycle Hungarian Rhapsodies. In addition, the great composer wrote a book, Gypsies and Their Music in Hungary. And by the end of the 12th century in France, the gypsy family Reyes formed the group Gypsy Kings, which was very successful and exciting. Everyone has probably heard their main hit, Bamboleo. This is one of the known works of the primitive artist Henri Rousseau, the Sleeping Gypsy. In 1976, Moldovan director Emil Luteanu shot Tabor Goes to Heaven, a popular Soviet film that nearly 65 million viewers watched within a year. In 2016, Boris Sobolev's film Gypsy Time came out, which caused another surge of gypsy phobia. A large part of the film consists of interviews with real people, ordinary gypsies, and representatives of the extremely small gypsy intelligentsia. The latter asserts that it's not the surroundings that have problems with the gypsies, but rather the gypsies have problems with the surroundings. They are abused, not allowed to work, and negative information about them is spread. After each such statement, Sobolev shows drug dealers who are already past their terms, or detained drug traffickers. In some families, all adults are in line. And what's characteristic is that neither age nor level of development have any effect on the propensity for criminal activity. The point of the film is that there is a fairly large ethnic and social group in society that does not recognize the authority of the state and its laws. For example, the scene of the next power outage among the gypsies, who ride in road machines but fundamentally do not want to pay for light. Or the wedding of 13-year-olds. These people do not just oppose themselves to the surrounding world, they are sincerely convinced that they are doing the right thing, and there is no other life. Education could change the behavior model, but the gypsies do not let their children study, even if they suddenly want to. A vicious circle arises. The same scenarios are reproduced by many generations without changes, and therefore, those few who do not want to trade in prohibited substances or live in poverty leave the gypsy world forever. They are torn by their own. Well, if we continue about movies, here's another interesting fact. One of the most popular roles in Russian-language films turned out to be not about a gypsy. In the movie Snatch, Brad Pitt plays one of the main roles, and his character is Mickey the Gypsy. But the thing is, in not quite accurate translation from the original. The film has several Russian translations, and in most of them there is a phrase, "There's one problem with the gypsies." It's impossible to understand what they're saying. They're speaking neither in Irish nor in English. However, if you pay attention to the original soundtrack, they're not speaking in Romani. The gypsies in the film are presented as travelers, as they are called in Irish, in English. They are sometimes actually referred to as Irish gypsies, but this name has no real kinship with actual gypsies and is used only because of a similar lifestyle. Modernity. To what extent can this be considered? The total number of gypsies in the world is estimated at 17 million people, of which about 10 million people in Europe, in the countries of the European Union, identify themselves as gypsies. Now, most of them live in Romania and Bulgaria. After these countries joined the European Union, the European visa-free space underwent a serious test of strength. Nomads began to storm the cities of Western Europe again, and the consequences were like in the Middle Ages. Of course, more humane. In 2010, French President Sarkozy, after the riots caused by the gypsies, announced the closure of more than 200 gypsy camps and the return of illegal immigrants to Romania and Bulgaria. Many of them left voluntarily, receiving financial assistance from France. 300 euros per adult and 100 per child. The same events occurred in Germany and other European Union countries. The unofficial capital of the gypsies is considered to be the Moldovan city of Soroki, the name of which does not come from birds, but translates as poverty. The city is located on the right bank of the Dniester River in a valley and is divided into two parts. Gypsies live on the hill, and Moldovans live in the lowlands. Gypsies have been living in Sorica since the 13th century, but it was only in the 80s and 90s that large-scale construction of local palaces began. Strangely enough, this Gypsy Hill is an unofficial attraction of Moldova. Tourists come here mainly to see architectural masterpieces and to get a glimpse of the life of a people who have no homeland. Most of the houses in Soroca are unfinished 2- or 3-story buildings in the Asian style. If a tasteless mishmash of columns, balconies, pyramid roofs, cupolas, ancient Greek statues, and religious symbols can be attributed to any style at all. Nevertheless, if on one side of the fence there are palaces, then right behind the high gates begins the dirt and decay. However, there is its own capital here, built as if it were a copy of the American one, and its own gypsy baron. After the crisis of the late 80s, even the wealthy gypsies of the 40s could not afford palaces, and a large part of them remained unfinished. They made a fortune and scattered around the world. Nowadays, the population of the Gypsy Hills significantly increases only on holidays. On International Romani Day, April 8th, Easter, Christmas, and New Year's, Roma return home from all over the world, seeking to reunite with their families. Easter is one of the main holidays, as the Roma of Europe lived in Byzantium for a long time, and most of them are Orthodox. There's even a joke that the Roma baked such a large Easter bread that they were fined again for illegal construction. And by the way, about the real Roma. This is Alfie Best, the richest Roma in Europe. He was born in Great Britain and at 10 years old started helping his father trade asphalt, dropped out of school at 12, and at 14 started reselling cars and vans. Today, the name Alfie Best is primarily associated with the company. It is involved in construction, park management, and golf clubs. Best now has absolutely everything. A special feature worth £6 million sterling. Personal helicopters, 382nd place in the list of rich people in Great Britain. His condition is estimated at £341 million sterling. But in most cases, modern gypsies, of course, live poorly. This is what the most dangerous quarter in Europe looks like. In the Slovak city of Košice is the largest ghetto gypsy in Europe, the WWII district. Official data shows around 65,000 people live there, while unofficial data suggests 10,000. It is known that up to 15 gypsies can live in one apartment. Gas, water, and electricity are turned off here because most residents do not pay rent and utilities. Healthcare is also at a low level, with diseases such as hepatitis, human immunodeficiency virus diarrhea, typhus, and meningitis widespread. However, there is a school and a kindergarten here. WWII has its own bus line, however, transportation hardly goes deep into the area. Due to frequent attacks by aggressive residents, bus drivers serving this line receive extra pay for working in dangerous conditions. It's worth noting one more key detail. There are many evidences and arrests of gypsies by federal authorities of various countries in connection with the distribution of illegal substances. Moreover, no one knows the true scale of the traffic, as many caravans and camps move freely across countries. In connection with this, many wealthy gypsies are associated in folktales specifically with such earnings. And so our story comes to an end. Write in the comments what you think about gypsies, and see you in the next videos on our Subtitles channel.